State's response to defense's verified motion for immediate transfer of custody. Now comes the state of Indiana by prosecuting attorney Nicholas C. McCleland and respectfully files its response to the defendant's verified motion for immediate transfer of custody and would ask the court to consider the following. 1. That charges were filed against the defendant Richard Allen on October 28, 2022 for 2 counts of murder in violation of IC 35-42-1-12. 2. That the Carroll County Sheriff's Department requested the defendant be transferred to the Indiana Department of Correction for safekeeping, and said request was granted. 3. That the defendant was transferred to Westfield Correctional Facility and has been housed there since November 3, 2022. That within the facility he is housed in segregation unit for his safety and protection. That the defense previously filed an emergency motion to modify the safekeeping order on April 5, 2023, which was denied. That the defense then filed a motion to reconsider and request for due process hearing on May 3, 2023. That the hearing was held, after which the court denied the defense's motion to modify the safekeeping order, stating that the allegations advanced by the defense were not supported by the evidence presented. The court added that the defendant was being treated more favorably than other inmates housed at the Westfield facility. The court further commented that it was reasonable and necessary to house the defendant at Westfield Correctional Facility to ensure the defendant's safety to prevent serious bodily injury to himself. That the defense has now filed a verified motion for immediate transfer of custody, alleging additional mistreatment of the defendant at Westfield Correctional Facility. That in the defense's last motion, the defense now accuses Westfield Correctional Facility correctional officers Sergeant Joshua Robinson and Sergeant Randy Jones of unjust and inhumane treatment of the defendant. That once again, the allegations in the defendant's motion, while colorful or dramatic, are not correct. That both Sergeant Joshua Robinson and Sergeant Randy Jones have worn patches that refer to Odinism. That the patches reflect Sergeant Robinson's and Sergeant Jones' religious beliefs and not associated with any kind of cult. That Sergeant Jones did not remove the patch from his vest until ordered to do so by command. That the Sergeant Jones is assigned to the B pod of the unit while the defendant is housed in A pod. That Sergeant Jones assisted with moving defendant from one spot to another within the facility and also has been tasked with a 15-minute check-in with the defendant facilitated by his mental health safety plan. That Sergeant Jones does not choose which detail he works and works the detail that he is assigned by his command. That Sergeant Jones did remain at his post while defendant visited with his wife because that is what is assigned for him to do. That the defense seems to imply that Sergeant Jones should have left his post in violation of his direct orders and therefore risk his employment just so the defendant and his wife could have more privacy. The fact that the defense expects the defendant and his wife to have intimate privacy in a prison is astonishing. The Sergeant Jones has never threatened, harassed, or spoken on a one-on-one with the defendant. The Sergeant Jones was never ordered by his command to threaten or harass the defendant. That the defendant was tased twice between May 9, 2023 and May 25, 2023 because he would not follow the commands of the correctional officers. That correctional officers are required to follow protocol when dealing with an inmate who is in violation of the rules. That Sergeant Jones did not tase the defendant out of anger, spite, or in an effort to hurt the defendant or treat him inhumanely. That Sergeant Robinson is assigned to a pod where the defendant is housed. That Sergeant Robinson has never harassed, threatened, or spoke on a one-to-one basis with the defendant. That Sergeant Robinson was never ordered by his command to threaten or harass the defendant. that Sergeant Robinson also continued to wear his patches until ordered to remove them by command. That inmate Robert Baston has written a few letters to the court claiming that correctional officers within Westfield Correctional Facility are corrupt. That inmate Robert Baston is a convicted child molester under cause number 69C01-0909-FA-03, serving a 40-year sentence. That throughout this case, Robert Baston has asked for modifications after modification throughout his case, citing wrongful conviction, the COVID pandemic, and even because the DOC is providing the wrong kind of soap. That Robert Baston, throughout his sentence, has tried every means imaginable to reduce or modify his sentence for his heinous crime. That at the hearing on June 15, 2023, the defense subpoenaed inmate Robert Baston to court so that he could give a sworn statement to the court, and inmate Robert Baston refused to leave his cell. That the allegations by inmate Robert Baston are hardly credible. That the defense's allegations that the correctional officers are attempting to conceal unacceptable practices is false. That Sheriff Tony Liggett has no vested interest in keeping the defendant at Westfield Correctional Facility other than the safety and well-being of the defendant. That the defense insinuates that Sergeant Robinson and Sergeant Jones were assigned to assist with the moving of the defendant because they believed in Odinism, and that the Westfield Command intentionally did this in some effort to mistreat the defendant. The warden, John Gallipo, has signed an affidavit attached to the response that ensures that no one in command had an agenda related to Odinism or ever ordered anyone under their command to harass or threaten the defendant. The Sergeant Jones and Sergeant Robinson have both signed affidavits attached to this response that outline their duties in the facility and affirm that they have never threatened, harassed, or made any references to Odinism to the defendant. That both Sergeant Joshua Robinson and Sergeant Randy Jones were interviewed at Westfield Correctional Facility by investigators on September 18, 2023, and both were found to be cleared of any wrongdoing. That neither Sergeant Robinson nor Sergeant Jones are part of a radical hate group. That defense continues to make unfounded accusations supported by absolutely no proof. That the defendant is isolated for his protection, and would be isolated if he were moved to another facility. That if the defendant is moved to the Cass County Jail, he will be placed in essentially the same kind of holding cell that he is in now, with the exception that it would be more convenient for the defense. That the Carroll County Sheriff's Department does not have the manpower to transport the defendant. That the Carroll County Jail does not have mental health counselors or counseling, whereas the Department of Corrections has those resources available for the well-being of the defendant. That the defendant is no way being treated less fairly than anyone else in the facility. He certainly is not being treated less fairly than a convicted person in that facility. That the colorful, dramatic language used by the defense was an attempt to curry public favor for their client and try this matter in the public eye instead of in the courtroom, as they have done in several motions to date. That again, the state has no opinion on where the defendant should be housed awaiting trial, but the state does take offense to the irresponsible allegations of the defense in the motion, including accusing 2 correctional officers of wrongdoing with absolutely no proof of such. That the state has no objection to the defendant being moved to a facility within the Department of Corrections to better accommodate his needs, but the court has already addressed that issue in previous orders. That the defendant's current placement at Westfield Correctional Facility is not a violation of his civil liberties. That the conditions that the defendant is housed in have not changed since the last time the issue was litigated in front of this court on June 15, 2023. That the Carroll County Sheriff's Department declined the request of defense to move the defendant because the Carroll County Sheriff's Department does not have the manpower to transport the defendant. that the Department of Corrections is more equipped to transport the defendant back and forth to court dates in order to keep the defendant safe and ensure that he makes it to all future hearings. That the defense is consuming the limited resources of this office and this court with repetitive motions that lack any factual basis. Wherefore, now comes the state of Indiana by prosecuting attorney Nicholas C. McCleland and files their response to the defendant's verified motion for immediate transfer of custody and would ask the court to consider the same when making its decision and for all other just and proper relief in the premises. Thanks for watching Deb's True Crime Notebook. Please leave any comments you might have below. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and ring that bell for all notifications.